Здравствуйте, дорогие коллеги, всех очень рада видеть. Сейчас скоро будем начинать. У нас есть взрослые участники и поменьше. Ну что же, дорогие друзья, давайте будем начинать. Сегодня я рада вас приветствовать на международной конференции научной, которая называется «Историко-культурное наследие в цифровом измерении», которая проходит в рамках Пермского научного форума «Наука и глобальные вызовы XXI века». И целью нашей трехдневной встречи является обсуждение вопросов применения информационных технологий в сохранении, изучении, репрезентации исторического и культурного наследия. И мне бы хотелось, чтобы мы в эти 3 дня обменялись опытом, энергией и были рады, может быть, для какого-то дальнейшего продолжения. Это была бы такая задача максимум для нас. Перед тем, как начать наше мероприятие, мне бы хотелось вам напомнить, что чтобы все слушатели держали микрофон выключенным и чтобы это не фонило у спикера. Конференция у нас двуязычная, поэтому мы будем периодически переключаться с русского на английский, с английского на русский. И будем в этих 2 билингвальных режимах функционировать. Также я бы хотела напомнить, что если у вас есть желание включить камеру, мы только это приветствуем. Если у вас нет такого желания, это нормально, да, но вместе с тем вы должны помнить, что наша трансляция идет на YouTube-канал Пермского университета, поэтому если у вас какие-то есть этические соображения, держите выключенным вашу камеру. То есть имейте в виду, что здесь наше сообщество гораздо шире слушателей этой конференции, поэтому имейте это в виду. И сегодняшнее наше заседание я была бы рада начать с приветственного слова декана историко-политологического факультета без 5 минут, да, утвержденного доктора исторических наук. Я не буду так, конечно, утверждать, но это, я думаю, что это так и будет, все будет хорошо. Надежда Владимировна у нас недавно защитила докторскую диссертацию, и мои снова поздравления. Пожалуйста, Надежда Владимировна, очень рада вас видеть.
Спасибо, Надежда. Да, поскольку все-таки наше мероприятие двуязычное, я позволю себе обращаться ко всем вам на английском языке, и поэтому, dear participants, colleagues and friends, I'm glad to see you here in the Perm State University, and on behalf of the Faculty of History and Political Science of Perm State University, I welcome you to our conference, Historical and Cultural Heritage in the Digital Dimensions. For our faculty, the issues and problems of cultural heritage and digital technologies are important and priority both in our research and in our educational programs. And I'm happy to share the news that in the next academic year, we will start a master program on digital technologies in creative industries. And its leader will be Nadezhda Pavroznik, and I'm glad to say it to you. And but it's the future, and today and now I would like to wish you successful work, rich professional dialogue, and just good communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadezhda Vladimirovna. I'm glad to see you here, and as well all the participants. And now we are ready to start with our first session. But first of all, for our foreign participants, I need to explain some things about the conference in general. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the International Conference Cultural Heritage in the Digital Dimension here in Perm. And I wish we were here together with the other opportunities going beyond the university's wall. But as soon as the pandemic influences a lot, but anyway, I believe we can face in person at some point. And the conference is organized by the Faculty of History and Politics and the Center for Digital Humanities in Perm State University, under support of the leading academics from different countries of the globe. We are proud that the conference is being conducted in conjunction with the Perm Scientific Forum, a large regular event which became a symbol of Perm academia. And this year is the exceptional one, not only due to the challenges of the pandemic, but also due to the support by Springer Publishing House, the international one. And some of the participants submitted their papers to the volume Science and Global Challenges in the 21st Century. In this area, science and technology. The other contributions will be published soon as in the form of conference proceedings indexed in the Russian Quotation Index. The conference sessions include 2 plenary sessions, one for today and the other one for tomorrow, and also 10 conference sections and a master class, which will be held tomorrow evening. During this 3 days, we will discuss the application of information technologies in the preservation, study, and representation of cultural heritage via digital means, exchange of experience, and identify the needs for the development of digital environment of GLAM institutions for better social and cultural impact. And thank you everyone who made this conference possible. I mean not only the Center for Digital Humanities team, but also those who join us at the program committee and organizing committee to prepare this event. I would like to conclude my speech by encouraging the speakers and attendees to participate in all the activities and discussions online for the next 3 days. and I wish everyone a successful and fruitful conference. And now it's time to launch the conference with the first plenary session. We have so many fantastic speakers today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow. And I should pay attention to all the attendees that the aim of the conference is a fruitful exchange with ideas and energy. So we're very welcome for the questions to our speakers, which can be taped here in the chat or asked orally during the Q&A sessions. Today we are starting the plenary session, and I must to pay attention that every speaker will have 20 to 25 minutes for presentation, and then we have about 15 or 10 minutes for questions and answer session. Let me check if we have the first speaker here. Yeah.
Hi, Nadezhda. I'm here.
Hello, Eleftherios. Great to see you. And please, very welcome our first keynote, Eleftherios Anastasivitis. He's a researcher, software engineer, VR series, game designer and developer, and also he's a 3D artist. He works at the Computer and Network System Technologies Lab, Department of Applied Informatics, University of Macedonia, and in Thessaloniki. And the presentation is devoted to the factors for the evaluation of the experiential and full immersive virtual museum for the Antikythera mechanism. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you again, Nadezhda, for the invitation here in the International Conference Cultural Heritage in the Digital Dimension. I will not act as a keynote. I will transfer my experience in virtual reality, 3D graphics, 3D series games, focusing on the Antikythera mechanism to this very interesting conference. And thank you again for the invitation. I will try to share my screen. Okay, and I hope that you can see my screen.
Perfectly, thanks.
Okay. The title of our presentation is Factors for the Evaluation of the Experiential and Full Immersive Virtual Museum for the Antikythera Mechanism. I'm Eleftherios Anastasovitis, and my co-author is my supervisor, Professor Manos Roumeliotis. We come from Computer and Network Systems Technologies Laboratory from Department of Applied Informatics in University of Macedonia in Thessaloniki, Greece. This is part of my PhD research in the university. The outline of our presentation is the Antikythera mechanism. After that, we will go to virtual Antikythera mechanism project. We will mention our research fields. Then we will go to the virtual museum for the Antikythera mechanism and beyond virtual museums. What's the challenges? We will see which challenges are outside. And we will conclude with factors for the evaluation of this new type of virtual museums, experiential virtual museums. So the Adikisira mechanism is the emblematic artifact that was discovered in an ancient shipwreck nearby the rocky coast of the homonym island at the Aegean Sea in the beginning of last century. The Adikisira mechanism activates different sciences and stimulates the interest of a huge number of researchers. I'm not the expert on the Adikisira mechanism. There is a lot of bibliography and references from very important people out there. So I will mention only some highlights for the Adikisira mechanism, and I will focus on my research field in virtual reality and creative industries, immersive technology, all this stuff. Regarding the Adikisira mechanism. Archaeologists are documenting the findings of the mechanism fragmentation, hoping to complete the puzzle of all missing parts. Astrophysicists attribute periodic astronomical phenomena to the first ever human computer. Mechanical engineers try to reconstruct functional physical models of the Adikisira mechanism. While we software developers suggest representations on digital versions of this artifact. The uninterrupted research on the Adikisira mechanism has peaked in recent decades, both with first digital simulations and with the interdisciplinary Adikisira mechanism research project. That offers many data sets and many very big knowledge about the Adikisira mechanism. However, there are still unanswered questions about the Adikisira mechanism, and many researchers are focusing to their expertise to answer to some of these questions. The virtual Adikisira mechanism is the encoded name of my research, PhD research in the University of Macedonia. The field of my research is computers and ancient Greek technology. I am working on 3D simulations, 3D representations, trying to interlink functionalities of the Adikisira mechanism to my virtual productions. I try to make interactive virtual environments and provide the full immersive experiences to the users, not only for the researchers, but for general public. And we also focusing in VR serious games that are designed for educational purposes under the umbrella of virtual reality. That's my big love. Our research, we started with the city scans data set from the big project, the Adikisira mechanism research project, using some special software packages for the volumetric analysis. We made some progress on this type of research. We are working with special 3D graphics software packages and trying to interconnect or reuse the data sets from CT scans that are enclosed into the laboratories because of some restrictions in infrastructure. And virtual reality and serious games, as I mentioned before, is our field that we love to work on it. Through this research with CT scans, we democratize CT scans. We bring them out from the laboratory to let's say, through game engines to the general public. This is a pipeline that I implemented using computed tomographies of the fragments. Through the analysis and visualization with isosurface and changing level of details, we exported OBJ models, 3D model optimization. We made decimation on these 3D models, and from high polys, we succeed to have low polys. I mean, 3D models with huge economy on their size. After that, we used only two images in higher resolution for each of the fragment of the Antikythera mechanism on this 3D untextured object. And as you can see on the bottom line, we artificially reconstructed fragments with a very big level of detail and very huge sense of photorealism. After that, we made the integration of these 3D reconstructed fragments into a virtual place, our virtual museum for the Antikythera mechanism, and we used virtual reality and 3D serious games and all this stuff behind the gaming industry to create this virtual place for exposing our artifacts, our 3D reconstructed artifacts. Regarding the virtual museum for the Antikythera mechanism, there is a short video, but you will see and some other videos from testing by end users. We will mention the technologies that we used for the implementation of this virtual museum. I go forward here to win some, to save some time. We will talk about the functionality of X-ray viewer, and we will see the advantages of this new type of interaction using CT scans in a different way, in very different way. We will see some full immersive interactions by the end users, and you can see also here some of this stuff. And after that, we will talk about the test and the evaluation of and the results of this evaluation. So I will go forward. Technologies that we used, 3D, we used 3D graphics and special software packages such as Cinema 4D by Maxon, 2D graphics software packages for texturing and applying materials on our virtual place and in our 3D content. We used as a platform the game engine coming from Unity 3D, that provides very extra power in implementing virtual places and serious gaming. And the platform that we focus for this production is the Oculus Rift S with touch controllers, second generation, that offer very big, a very huge level of, let's say, immersion in our virtual place. Regarding 3D digital representations, you can see here some of the exhibits, the fragment A, for example, and the user can grab it. you can see that it's a 3D object, a texture 3D object that came only with this pipeline that I described before. No photogrammetry, no 3D scanning. We had just the data set from CT scans that can be used only for volumetric analysis of the objects that have been scanned through X-rays. And we created a new type, not a new type, we used the CT scans to create a new type of, to create a representation of this object. Regarding the X-ray viewer functionality, you can see the interactions that the player makes. Through the X-ray viewer functionality in our virtual museum, the player can examine the corroded artifacts, the corroded fragments in a unique way. He or she can see through, into the cell of the 3D object. So we can say that we succeeded to democratize CT scans from the laboratories. General public can gain some additional knowledge about the Geocities mechanism. And all the stuff of virtual, the combination of virtual reality and 3D graphics offered us this opportunity. Going forward, full immersive interactions that we have created here is also from a demonstration that we made in European Researchers' Night in Thessaloniki. And you can see all the interactions that the player makes into the screen. He can do things, actions that are prohibited in a physical museum. He can grab the fragments and he can examine it in front of his her eyes. No problem if they will drop down, they will not break. They are digital, and this is additional, let's say, advantage in our research and how our research can offer new possibilities to general public. About the testing and evaluation of our virtual museum for the Geocities mechanism, as I said before, we made 4 demonstrators here in Thessaloniki. It was the Thessaloniki International Fair, and in the top right corner you can see the Minister of Education testing our virtual museum. And there you can see also my professor, my advisor, Manos Roumeliotis. The second demo was in the European Research Night that many people tried tested our virtual museum. Another demonstration was made in Philoxenia International Fair for Tourism in Thessaloniki. You can see in the bottom left corner, and also in Rodi Festival here in Thessaloniki in Aristotle University in Greece. Now, going forward through the evaluation process, there was some highlights, some comments from the end user that said, oh, wow, it's very interesting, this work that you've made. What about connecting gaming and serious gaming in a virtual museum? And that was the cornerstone of our next activity. We are going beyond virtual museums. Virtual museums that the user become from passive user, he becomes a protagonist. We now stop using the word storytelling. We use the word story living, because the user has to live, to experience all this virtual created content, environment. He has to examine and act as a protagonist in these predefined scenarios that can connect an exhibit on a virtual exhibition, a virtual museum, with a scenario in the time that this exhibit, this object was used. The cornerstone for our next generation of virtual museum is creative industries in combination with immersive technologies, and we are focusing in VR series games for the Adikithira mechanism. So we come one step forward. We have created a framework that combines virtual museum and serious games. We are leading to the experiential virtual museum, where the user acts as a protagonist. About the thematics of this beyond this new type of virtual museum, the starting point is the virtual museum for the Adikithira mechanism, and through designed areas, he can have the user can have can experience the cargo experience, the inscriptions. He can examine the inscriptions in a different way. He has to visit the astronomy lab in the ancient era, where he can understand the periodical phenomena such as lunar or solar eclipses, celestial orbits, etc., with the astronomer of the ancient era. And through the mechanology lab, he can act as the user can act as an assistant to the engineer of the ancient era, to trying to recreate the Adikithira mechanism using the tools of the ancient era. So all the knowledge about the Adikithira mechanism is combined into a virtual museum that embeds experiences, and the user has to act, has to complete this predefined scenarios, and he gains the knowledge in a unique way as a protagonist. So all this work is focusing in a better understanding and better communication in cultural heritage, focusing on the Adikithira mechanism. This new type of virtual museum, the experiential virtual museum, needs to be evaluated. So the factors that we suggest for this evaluation that we will run in the next few months, according to the restrictions of the coronavirus, are usability, the usefulness of our virtual production, the level of immersion that the user can have into this virtual place, and using all the interactions that we have created. But also the user satisfaction is one of the most powerful factors. How happy was with this new type of experience. If the user can suggest this new virtual type of virtual production to his friends, her friends, and so on. And also we, according to the restrictions of COVID-19, we have suggested an evaluation protocol that describes exactly what's the steps that have to be followed to complete the evaluation of our experiential virtual museum. Here are the main references that we used for our contribution and for this presentation. I want to say for another time that I am not the expert on the Adikithira mechanism. There are many people out there that can describe, they can describe and transfer all the knowledge about the Adikithira mechanism. Our expertise, let me say this expertise, but it's a bad word to say that you are an expert. That means that you are becoming obsolete if you are an expert somewhere. We are focusing in virtual reality, 3D graphics, serious games, 3D games for offering to general public new types of communication with cultural heritage, and new types for better understanding cultural heritage with digital means. Thank you for your attention. Spasiba Nazdelsta for the invitation to the conference. I think that we are in our time.
Thank you very much, Eleftherios. Just a great, fantastic talk. You know, the Antikythera mechanism is one of the best worldwide examples of scientific reconstructions to understand how the mechanism worked and how it was used by the people. So your project helps to understand the things and to put the object into the context, which is just great. We have several questions so far, and I encourage the audience to ask the questions orally or tape them to the chat. So the first question, what about the adaptation of the game to audiences? How it works here?
Through the evaluation, the first phase of evaluation in a virtual museum for the Adikithira mechanism, we saw that our productions it was very friendly to any age of to any ages. They tried people from middle-aged people, young peoples, all our users were adults. Through the results, we saw that the user satisfactions and the usability of this virtual museum was very, let's say, good. The feedback was very good. Far from their experience in gaming, many of them tried for first time virtual reality, for first time gaming, and that made us, let's say, a good feeling.
Thank you. There is a question from Sally Chambers. Please, you can ask.
Thanks very much for a fabulous presentation. Very interesting. I'm a librarian, so this is all new to me. So I just wondered, so I loved your slide about the democratization of CT scans. And I was just wondering, because you said that no 3D technology was used in this and it was all CT scans. And I just wondered, what is the difference? So is it more expensive to use CT scans, or more difficult to use 3D technology? And I just wondered, what is the comparison between the two methodologies? Would it have been possible with the 3D technologies to have done the gaming? So just as a comparison, if that made any sense.
Yeah, thank you, Sally, for your good words. I will suggest you to view another presentation that is later about the Panastasis Virtual Museum, where we put archives into not a virtual museum, in a new type, or in this new type of virtual museum, experiential museums. Coming back to your main question, CT scans, if there is a data set with CT scans, we have a pipeline that we can use them under some restrictions to recreate new 3D representations about an object or about an exhibit. For sure, if we have in our let's say for you, if we can use photogrammetry or 3D scanning to scan a 3D object, I suggest to follow this type of digitization. In the Adikithira mechanism, it's very fragile. All these fragments, they are exhibited in the Archaeological Museum in Athens, and it's impossible, I suppose it is impossible to make a new research on digitization of the artifacts. So we went to the path of what we have got in our hands. We have got CT scans. Can we create or use these CT scans to recreate or make a new type of representation of the Adikithira mechanism? And with this pipeline, we use the data set and only two images, front and the back image in high quality. And we recreated these artifacts.
Thanks very much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Another question is related a little bit to the data set as well. What about open data and open science approaches here? Is it possible to use and reuse some sort of data, not all of them, but some maybe?
Yeah, I am lucky that this data set is installed in our lab, in a CNST lab. The Adikithira research project, the Adikithira mechanism research project was, let's say, the brain for bringing in life this CT scan dataset. So about the open policy for this dataset, it's not in our field. For sure, open access in open data will, let's say, accelerate the examination and research on the Adikithira mechanism from new researchers and from anyone who's interested in all this stuff.
Thank you. And the next one is a more technical one. What about the adaptation to the size, the tall, the viewer? Is it an issue? I mean, for VR and gaming.
It's about the decimation of 3D models, or about the X-ray viewer?
It's about the viewer, yeah.
Okay, it's about the viewer. About the viewer, we made, let's say, a clever use of our new type of representations. We used the CT scans through open source software, the Dristi software that help us in volumetric visualization and examination of CT scans. And we created a package of images, one behind the other, and we give an illusion of layers of the inner structure of any fragment. So regarding the X-ray viewer that we have into the virtual museum, we use only images. So there is no, let's say, there is no problem with the size of these images. But the major problem was the decimation that we had to make to the OBJ files, the untextured OBJ files, through the conversion of CT scans to 3D meshes. That was too painful.
Yeah, it's always the problem. But I think we can cope. The next question is about the future work. Do you think to make this VR content free for public when it's ready?
Yeah. This is the main focus. We are focusing on this direction with my professor. We want to give access to anyone who has VR headset like Oculus Rift S and laptop or a desktop that can work with a VR headset. As it is in the context of my PhD, we have to make some passing to complete our research, and then anyone will can access to this virtual production through the CNST Lab official site, and through the links on ResearchGate that I suggest anyone to follow us and get connected for any further discussion. And we are open not only in discussion, but in new, let's say, collaborations. And this is a suggestion to you also, Nadezhda.
Thank you.
Collaborations.
Great. I think the presentation and the future of your project is a brilliant one, and I love the project so much.
Thank you very much.
I can see the other questions, but thank you so much for being with us. And I know that you will join us a bit later. And also, I know that you have another event right now, so you have to jump out and enjoy your own conference as well. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
It was a great presentation.
Thank you very much, Nadezhda. Thank you a lot.
And now we are ready to move to our next guest. And let me introduce to you Professor Valerie Schafer, who is a professor in contemporary European history at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History in the University of Luxembourg. And she is an expert in the history of the internet and the web. He works a lot in the field of web history and web archiving and analysis of the web. She also investigates history of digital technologies, web archives, and digital cultures. And I can yeah, I can see Valerie. Valerie, hello, great to see you.
Yeah,
Yeah, and the talk will be devoted to the past web as heritage, practices, challenges, and uses of web archives. So the floor is yours. Great to see you.
thank you very much, Nadja, for this kind introduction, for your invitation, for this exciting program, and for the first conference. I also learned a lot, and now I have to share my screen. Here it is. In a few seconds, I may start. Yeah, up and here we are. So my topic today is related to web archives. The web as heritage is not just about web archives. We could have talked, for example, about nostalgia of what we may call Web 1.0 and this kind of web that was very handicraft and so on. But I will focus on what we now call born digital heritage. And here in the audience, we have several experts of this topic, like Sally Chambers, like Nadja. We'll come back to her work too later, and she will also present her work later. But first, let me just focus on this Charter on the Preservation of Digital Heritage that was published in 2003 by UNESCO. At the same time, the intangible heritage was also defined. And within this digital heritage, of course, we have two kinds of heritage. One is related to digitized heritage, when you have, for example, a book or a text document that you will digitize, that you will move online. And the second one is born digital heritage, which means something that was already online and that has been preserved, archived heritage. We may think it's easiest, of course, it was already online, so it has just to be preserved. It is, as you will see, a bit more complicated, and it's not for web archive one-to-one copy, as the historian Niels Brugger explained very well, but we will go further into these web archives. So they are part of this born digital heritage. Of course, there are plenty of other born digital heritage, like email, for example. But we will go and focus on this web archive that started before the UNESCO defined born digital heritage, as the first preservation of web archives started in '96. And it was due to Internet Archive, which is a US foundation, which was created by Brewster Kahle. There were other initiatives that were launched at the same time, but of course it's the most famous one. And if you go on the Wayback Machine, which is a search engine, I would say, for web archives, you can see that there are currently more than 600 billion web pages that were saved since '96. So we may talk about big data. I'm not sure a computer scientist will say it's a perfect big data, but you see that we have a broad born digital heritage that historians, but also other disciplines like researchers in information science and a lot of other disciplines are more and more interested. So to talk first about born digital heritage, of course, Brewster Kahle was a pioneer in this field with Internet Archive. We will see that there were also a bit later national initiatives. And for example, if you want to retrieve the website of the University, you may go to the Wayback Machine and you may navigate through several captures of this website starting in 2012. I'm not so familiar with the history of universities in Russia, so I'm not sure if at some point there were another URL for the Perm University, and if we may go back before 2012, because when the URL changed, then you may lost the link to the website, but at least I was able to retrieve this more than 100 captures of your university's website. And here you may have a very small overview of the changes through time. So of course, this one is the first one, and then it has evolved, and it's very interesting to retrieve the design and the news. And so here I want to show you a very short video, because I'm not sure everybody is familiar with the Wayback Machine. So here is a very small navigation through the Wayback Machine. So I typed the URL because a search by keywords is just focused on home pages, and it's not so, so precise. So here you can navigate a timeline. I went into 21 to be sure that I was on the right website first, and it's a bit slow sometimes, the Wayback Machine, but here we will arrive on this web archives of the website of Perm University. And when I was sure enough I was on the right website, then I went to 2013. So you can navigate through the timeline, and here again Wayback Machine is searching. And here we are. So with the photos that were preserved and everything, it's not always the case. And what I wanted to show you is that you can navigate through pages. But you see we are in August, and suddenly with an hyperlink, we'll jump through time. Keep it in mind. Hyperlinks may create some kind of temporal jumps. And here you can see also that the element of the pages were not archived at the same time. I have to talk very fast, sorry for this. You have a lot of other functionalities based on metadata, like a summary. You can, try different years to see if there were more text, more images, and compare the structure of the website and the images. But also, talking about the structure of the website in 2020, you can have a look which part is research, bachelor program, the main page, and so on. So you can see also how the structure of the website evolved. You can also see if there were a lot of changes through the website. The higher changes are in blue, and you may also compare some pages and see if there were a lot of change, yellow for deletion, blue for addition. And here you will see these pages and the comparison. So you can really play with metadata of the website and with these tools that are available on the Wayback Machine. So I think the video is over now, and we can move to the next slide. So it was a bit fast with this video, but as you can see, you can navigate the web of the past. You can go through hyperlinks, so it's not just a screenshot. Sometimes the deepness of the preservation is not so good, so you will at some point be disappointed as you won't find one precise web pages you were searching for. But you can also have overview of a website through time thanks to these functionalities, this use of the metadata of the website about changes, structure, and so on. As I told you, Internet Archive is, of course, not the only one with archiving the web. As national institutions, and notably in Europe, have felt also the need to have their own preservation of their national web. So what is a national web? It's a big discussion, but for example, the Luxembourg Web Archive is archiving the web since 2016 for Luxembourg, for websites that are with .lu, but also companies that are in Luxembourg or Luxembourgish people who are outside the country, but related, of course, to Luxembourg. This is also the case, for example, in France. This is the case also in Great Britain. Sally was with us today, also did a wonderful job in Belgium to develop web archive, but also archiving of social networks. And I could mention a lot of countries and libraries that are archiving the web for their country. Some of them have put their archives online, like Internet Archive, but it's not the common rule. It's the case, for example, for the Portuguese web archive, arquivo.pt, that you can find online. But mostly it is something which is limited due to author rights, and that you have to to access within national libraries. And the collection, of course, are different from the one by Internet Archive. It's not the same curation, selection, because, of course, archiving the web, the entire web, is not feasible. So there are, of course, always some bias, selection, curation, and like in Switzerland, I gave you an example in French, but Switzerland is, for example, selecting content which is more related to culture, elections, political life, but not all the Swiss web, and depending of the country, it may be more or less inclusive when you are preserving the web. Of course, the users are not entirely forgotten, even if the focus is sometimes a bit more on institutional websites and so on. But as explained by here, the archive team, which is linked to Internet Archive. The motto, we are going to rescue your shit, is to explain that they want also to preserve a kind of vernacular web, like in this case, the Geocities. There were a lot of pages developed in the 90s, for example, on Geocities, like Jane's Place. And when the service eventually are closed, because, as you know, it evolves very, very fast. This team tried to preserve this kind of vernacular productions full of cats and entertainments and private life sometimes too. Moving to my next slide, I just wanted to close this first part on Born Digital Heritage by also underlining the fact that there are also other kinds, of course, of heritage and Born Digital Heritage, and to underline this initiative by Software Heritage of preserving also software. Internet Archive is also preserving software, and in some libraries, video game software, for example, are also preserved. Of course, web archives are not the only Born Digital Heritage. But let's move to my second point, which is related to Born Digital Heritage. I missed the word, as a reconstruction and the question of authenticity. You may remember that I told you at some point on the video that we were jumping from one date to another when surfing through, navigating through hyperlinks. And indeed, you will experience this kind of jump through time when you are visiting a website on on Internet Archive. And I also showed you that several elements of a page may have been archived at different times. For example, the robots on of Internet Archive won't capture every time the logo of Perm University, because they know it will stay the same. So they will reuse it when crawling the web pages. They don't crawl the logo. They have already it, but they will crawl new images or content, and they won't crawl everything at the same time. So the page that you will see is a reconstruction of a technical work, and you will have a lot of surprise. Of course, first, content that may be missing, like images, like things like in the 90s, a lot of flash content, web pages that were not preserved because the robot crawled only part of the website, and probably because a human told him not to crawl too deep into the website. So you can find this kind of picture, which is very frustrating because all images were lost at this time. But also, you may have also some patchwork or some surprise within a website. This was archived in January 97, but the one of the content of the web page is from May 97. It's not possible. There is a problem there. There is a patchwork, something that went, we can't say wrong, but which is related to this kind of captures. And as Niels Brugger underlined, we never have this copy of an original, but a kind of reconstruction that the historian, of course, needs to understand through a kind of digital hermeneutics to be more comfortable with these web pages. So we are always, I will say, and this will be my last point, between science and handicraft. It's not perfect regarding authenticity. Of course, this may be very important if we want to use web pages for legal issues. For the historian who is always crossing several sources, with it's not such a big problem. We have to be cautious, but applying the question of authenticity systematically to web archive is perhaps misleading. We may see that there may be some inconsistencies. It's the most important. Then to try to absolutely reconstruct exactly the web page, it's always better than just having, for example, a printed screenshot of a website to try to deal with the history of the web. But of course, it's complicated. We have a vast amount of data. The search is not always so practical within web archives. Also in national libraries, they have developed a lot of ways to search within their collections, which are of course smaller than the collection of Internet Archive. You may apply digital humanities methods and use computational tools. However, it's sometimes difficult to access the content and make some tools run on your web archive, because as I mentioned earlier, for example, in national libraries, you have to go to the National Library to use their web archive. So you have also to use, I would say, mostly the tools they develop, which are excellent one, but you have also some kind of limits, constraints, also to show website or to share the results of your research. So as Jane Winters, who is an historian working in London and professor of digital humanities, using web archives requires skills that many historians do not have. They are developing this kind of skills, but it's not always easy to use these web archives. And of course, I'm not talking only for historians, but in general. And you have also several ways of working with web archives. You may have more qualitative or quantitative ways to deal with them, but mostly no, we are hybridizing methods. And here I want to show you this work by Nadeja Provosnik. Here we are on her website. She is working, she will explain it later, on virtual museums online, and we'll move to the home page in a few seconds. So if you go on this virtual museum history.com, you will find a description of the project that she conducted in my center at C2DH, but also, of course, at the Perm University. And here, let's go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can see that she analyzed home pages, and here you have a very nice overview, but also analysis of these home pages. So it's more qualitative. But then if you go also through infographics, she made also a kind of distant reading. So here she reconstructed the evolution of websites in a very precise way, a kind of modeling, but she also used the change function from Internet Archive that I showed previously to give a very good overview of evolution of the websites. Sorry, she is, here it's when I stop the video, it was, yeah, I moved to the next slide. Up. Yeah, explaining the changes and giving, so moving from close to distant reading to realize something which is still a work in progress, but already a wonderful yeah, example of what we can do with web archives, and especially in the field of cultural heritage. I also previously mentioned the work, yeah, the word Geocities, and here we have an example of Jan Milligan in Canada, with an expert in exploring Geocities on pages through distant reading and through hyperlink mapping. And the researchers have more and more access to metadata, as I mentioned. So it is data about data. You may conduct a distant reading, so you don't have to go into the website, but you may understand a lot through this metadata, like in SHINE, that's the UK Web Archives, that provides the dates, the most important words in the website, and so on. I still have, yeah, 3 minutes. It's enough to give you the last overview I wanted to yeah, share with you. I'm currently working on a project with a lot of colleagues who are involved since years in web archives. I mentioned, yeah, Niels Brugger, but there are many others, Frédéric Claver and others, on, yeah, the COVID crisis and the IPC collection. It's an international collection that was conducted and related to the COVID web archives. And we are using the Canadian Archive Unleashed toolkit developed by Jan Milligan, Nick Ruest, and other colleagues to perform this kind of distance reading. Here is a slide by Niels Brugger, who is one of the co-PI of a European project, the WorkNet project, related to transnational events through web archives. And here you can have yeah, an example of distance reading. We were able to find, for example, which countries are represented in the COVID collection of the Danish library, or here something performed by Friedel Gerhardt, the number of new websites that appeared during the COVID crisis and that are related to Corona. Next slide will show you also that it was a prototype developed by Karin de Wilde in Netherlands, related also to the COVID collection, and you can move through it to see in a collection which countries are represented. And so we are really, yeah, collectively working on this kind of yeah, distant reading prototype, which were very useful also when I was studying the web sites of the terrorist attacks in Paris, in France, in INA. INA is the Audiovisual Institute in France, because as you can see, you have plenty of tweets. It was millions after the Bataclan crisis. And they have also developed specific tools for libraries, like the possibility to read tweets thanks to emoticons, the most famous emoticons. Here, of course, you will find the pen, because it was journalists and yeah, cartoons designers, yeah, who were killed, but also to link images and hashtags and so on. You have other tools like the Solar Wayback. You can find it on GitHub, which will allow you to harvest also web archives in Denmark, in Hungary, to see missing resources. And so it was just to show you that there are plenty of possibilities currently that are developing and that are yeah, helping us to yeah, analyze the web. A last word for a conclusion. Of course, this is also related to questions of governance, of values, of privacy, of ethics, of participation, of inclusiveness. And I could, yeah, mention a lot of other questions, accountability, transparency. So we have to also in the future to face all these challenges, and notably the one of, yeah, of course, inclusivity, and of course, political issues. For example, Bruce Turkell underlined when Trump was elected, yeah, that there could be, yeah, some threats on web archives. There were also cases of censorships in several countries of internet archive. And finally, also, groups who are claiming for a more inclusive archiving, like in the case of DocNo, which is preserving, for example, the movement Black Lives Matter. So here we have a lot of challenges that will come in the future because web archives are more and more becoming also important for history, but also for legal issue, for politics, and for our common heritage. I thank you for your attention, and I give you the floor back.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for this fantastic talk. And we have several questions so far. And also the first one from Sally. Sally, welcome. It's just applauding, but do you have any comments?
Yeah, no, so sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute. As always, Valerie, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. And even though I've seen Valerie present several times, there's always something new. So thanks very much. I was most fascinated by, because it's so relevant for this conference, how you explored the Perm State University. And I was just, and I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but I just wondered, with Russian language websites and Cyrillic, how much work has been done? So I know more from the digitization point of view that this is quite a challenge, dealing with different scripts and different things. And I just wondered how far research has been done into multilingual websites and this kind of thing, and the tools, how far they've been adapted to Russian language scripts, for example. It may not be your expertise, but I was just wondering.
No, it's not my expertise at all, but you are pointing something which is key in the future also. For researchers, I was as web archivist, if we want to be more inclusive, we have also this question of languages first. Second, it's also a way to underline how national archiving is important. I relied on Internet Archive, which has this idea of a universal access to knowledge, and which is trying to archive the whole not the whole web, but to be representative of the whole web, archiving, of course, in Korea, in Russia, and a lot of other countries, but it will never be as precise as if it is done in the country by people who are talking the language, who are experts of the webosphere of the country, and so on. So Internet Archive, we absolutely need it, of course, and we wish Internet Archive a long life, because at some point, if this stop, we won't have this international overview, but National Web Archive with this question of language is also key. We are currently in the WorkNet project, and you are involved in it, Sally, too, trying to think a bit more about studying transnational events. And here again, we have a problem, of course, if we want to analyze the COVID crisis in Hungary, in Denmark, and in France. Of course, we need to have languages skills. Through metadata, we can avoid it a bit and find keywords. But if we want to go further into the content with a more qualitative study, it's impossible. I have the feelings that at IPC, for example, or in countries like Belgium, Luxembourg, where they are multilingual, also websites or content in Luxembourgish or in German and in English and in French in the same country, they are advanced, or they are really thinking about it. But there is, I guess, a lot to do, and to perform further. And it's a key question, really. So thank you for underlining this.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Sally, for the question. I can't see the hands up, but there are several questions I have to ask. The first one, is it possible to assess some way the completeness of data set if we have no idea about what it should be?
It depends. For example, at INA, when I gave the example of terrorist attacks, they archived Twitter and they were able to show how many things they may have lost, because the IPA of Twitter allows also to have this kind of content. For Internet Archive, it's very hard to figure out. What is interesting is that, for example, researchers like Federico Nani, who wanted to find the website of his university, which was not available on the Wayback Machine, was able to reconstruct it through other archive from other country or part of Italy. And but yeah, it may be very difficult. And I agree that for distance reading, you have to be very cautious. If you don't know what is exactly archived, then everything may be false in your, you have just an image of the archived web and not the reality of the web. Researchers are working on it. We have good results. A way to document this is what we did in the WorkNet project, to have also oral interviews with web archivists about the spatial collections of the COVID crisis, to know what they had archived, what they didn't, and to also ask them to provide data about their collections. So then when we are navigating them, of course, it's clearer and we know what they try to preserve. So it's a way to assess what is available, but it's not feasible, for example, for the web of the 90s. It's already a bit too late.
Okay, thank you so much. The next one is about, probably you know that Russia doesn't have a national program for web archiving, and we have some, but it's not the national one. So the question, how to run a national program effectively and in a valuable way, and we're talking not about the money.
There were a lot of experiences and projects running through Europe. So I would recommend first to have contact with other countries in Europe. It is what, for example, Sally and the other in the Promise project did for Belgium, and also with the IPC, the International Internet Preservation Consortium, which is a consortium where all web archivists, I will say, around the world are joining regularly. And regarding money, which is of course an issue, but not always the most important one. It's also about skills, about technology, about people, of course, but there are often small teams that are running. A legal frame, of course, is needed too. But I would say that relying on the experience of web archivists in Europe, but also researchers that are always happy to share also their need, and to, you have a wonderful community which is ready to help. So I hope that someday Russia may have also his national web archiving. As I underline, it's important and complementary to what, for example, Internet Archive is doing.
And I think the final question for you for today, is it difficult to build a data set from the web archive? Because it's not so easy to trace the difference from one page to in comparison with the other. So that data set is not a web page.
Yeah, absolutely. It may be very difficult, and especially when you want to go transnational, for example, because so Internet Archive, to crawl Internet Archive may be difficult. To create corpus or corpora in national archives may be easiest because they provide this availability, but then you can't mix it with other data sets because of from other countries. So yeah, it's always a bit difficult, and especially when you want also to go to be transmedial, to go from social networks to website, and yeah, but we are really working on it, and there are a lot of development like the Archive Unleashed Toolkit, which are tools that are also designed to help researchers to go in the easiest way with creating corpora. So I think in the very close future, it will be less difficult. And also researchers in web archives are always happy to share, as I said, their expertise, to give tutorial and so on. So I'm optimistic that what we experience 8 years ago won't be what researchers will experience in 8 years, and that it will be, probably a bit easiest.
Great, thank you so much for your presentation. I must admit that your research is the great one. I love it so much. And also I forgot to mention that you are co-editor of the journal Internet Histories. And we will be happy to submit soon as guest editors the special volume on web histories of museums. So everyone is very welcomed. And thank you so much, Valerie, for being with us. I know that you are hurry for another event, but thank you so much.
Yeah. And I will come back to listen to other presentations. I'm really sorry I have to leave here for 1 hour, but I will be back then. And thank you again for the questions and for this opportunity to share this research.
Thank you very much, Valerie. And now we are moving to another guest, Professor Paul Arthur, who is the chair in Digital Humanities and Social Sciences and director of the Edith Cowan Center for Global Issues in the School of Arts and Humanities. And Professor Arthur speaks a lot and publishes a lot widely on major challenges and changes facing 21st century society, from the global impacts of technology on culture and identity to migration and human rights. And his talk for today, together with his colleague, Smith Isabel, who is research associate in the School of Arts and Humanities. And the presentation will be devoted to virtual exhibitions on slavery, new approaches in digital storytelling. Thank you very much, Paul, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Everything is fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your kind introduction and to speak at this important event. It's an honor for Isabel and I to speak to you today on the topic of virtual exhibitions on slavery. I'm just going to share my screen. Good. Oh, Zoom quickly. I'm sorry, Zoom quit then and now it's reconnected. I just want to see that you can hear me. I was trying to share my screen, which I'll do again.
Okay.
Can you see the shared screen now?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, thank you again. The digitization of museums and heritage have created diverse new opportunities for expressions of slavery, heritage, and slavery memory. Beyond traditional physical exhibition spaces, the history and legacies of slavery are seen in modes including apps, audio tours, immersive digital installations, interactive documentaries, video narratives, and more. Over the past year, COVID-19 has created further demands and appetites for the digitization of exhibition spaces. As part of a team developing an online exhibition about the legacies of slavery in Australia, we're exploring ways of telling the story of slavery in a virtual space. And this paper we'll present will identify some of the many new approaches and methods in digital storytelling that are being used in exhibitions and heritage projects about slavery. We'll begin by discussing the growing recognition around the world in histories of slavery, the development of slavery memory, and then more specifically, Australia's slavery pasts and memories. And we'll use this context to explore a range of digital museum and heritage examples across Europe, the Americas, Africa, Oceania, and in particular Australia. After a long period of silence, histories and memories of slavery are becoming more widely acknowledged across the world. Historian Ana Lucia Araujo identifies a rise in slavery memory beginning around the second half of the 20th century, and she attributes this to global social and political events, including the civil rights movement and the popularization of slave narratives in the United States, the decolonizing of African countries, and increasing reflections on the past in Europe following the Second World War and the horrors of the Holocaust. In the 1960s, West African countries started initiatives to preserve slave trade castles and fortresses, and from the 1970s, monuments to those who resisted and fought slavery appeared in Africa and the Caribbean, including Bassa in Barbados and Carlota in Cuba. By the 1990s and 2000s, exhibitions on slavery proliferated across Europe, the Americas, and the Caribbean. In 1994, UNESCO launched the Slave Route Project, Resistance, Liberty, Heritage, aimed at better understanding the ongoing global consequences of slavery and outlining guides for sites of slavery memory, such as memorials. In 2007, during the bicentenary of abolition commemorations in the United Kingdom, the International Slavery Museum was opened in Liverpool. Today, the histories and legacies of slavery are being increasingly challenged in multiple contexts worldwide. With the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, dominant discourses and monuments favouring slave owners and colonists have been interrogated and literally dismantled. A growing number of nations are examining their own involvement and responsibility in transatlantic slavery, no longer framed within the plantation context of the United States, but extended across the many axes of global trade routes and beneficiaries. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam recently opened Slavery, an exhibition telling for the first time the story of the Netherlands' extensive involvement in the slave trade. In 2019, an exhibition at Bogota's Museo del Oro, or the Gold Museum, examined a French trading ship, which was part of the triangular trade. The show recontextualized for audiences the gold surrounding them, which was largely mined by enslaved African people in Colombia, then Spanish colonized New Granada, from the 16th century. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Isabel Smith.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. Okay. So Australia has developed its own slavery heritage since British colonisation in 1788. Many of its British colonies were built and established through convict labour, and within one generation, British Australians established slavery practices across several major industries. From the late 1800s, Aboriginal men, women and children worked on sheep and cattle stations as pastoral and domestic workers, where they were given rations or little to no pay. Many were mistreated, physically and sexually abused, and forced to work under the threat of violence. Aboriginal people were also kidnapped to work as so-called trackers or guides on colonial expeditions. Slavery was also common in Australia's pearling and sugar industries. Labouring on the pearling boats in Australia's northwest, many Aboriginal people, as well as people from Southeast Asia, were captured and forced into the brutal and often deadly work of pearl diving. Divers were at the risk of the bends and shark attacks, and Aboriginal workers could be stranded on islands between seasons, preventing them from returning to their homelands. Australian South Sea Islander Imelda Davis details the practice of what was called blackbirding in Queensland, also commonplace in the pearling industry, in which people from the South Sea Islands were kidnapped from their homelands to work under the terrible conditions in the sugarcane fields. Davis's grandfather, Moses Tope Anares, was forced into a ship and taken from the beach off the island of Tanna, Vanuatu, to Queensland when he was 12 years old. While many Aboriginal people, migrants, people of colour and other minorities have experienced the realities of slavery for generations, Australia's slavery heritage has been receiving wider attention only recently. Davis's article is one example of a growing recognition in online research and journalism. The issue of Aboriginal workers' stolen wages, the withholding of Aboriginal people's pay by governments and businesses, has gained increasing public exposure since the early 2000s. The Black Lives Matter movement has also advanced conversations and recognition around Australia's slavery heritage. However, slavery is still excluded from many Australian narratives and identities. During the Black Lives Matter protests last year, Australia's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, stated in a radio interview that, quote, "It was a pretty brutal place, but there was no slavery in Australia," end quote. Morrison's comments, though hurtful and inaccurate, prompted widespread discussion about the country's heritage. The development of slavery memory across the globe has intersected with expanding digital technologies in museums and heritage. Liverpool's International Slavery Museum is one of many museums to offer virtual tours of its space, allowing audiences to explore the museum from their own homes. Online visitors can move through galleries including Life in West Africa, Enslavement and the Middle Passage, Legacy, and Journey to Justice, navigating corridors and floors with 360-degree access. The museum's website also publishes a wide range of online-only content, including podcasts, articles, and interviews with artists and curators, and videos of actors depicting historical figures and events. Museums are also developing online-specific components to their physical exhibitions. The Rijksmuseum's Slavery, which tells the stories of 10 individuals who were subjected to or benefited from slavery, offers these stories in specially tailored formats for its website. Online visitors can select a story to hear audio narration accompanied with moving image sequences showing materials such as museum artifacts, paintings, and handwritten letters, while also going on an interactive virtual tour of the physical exhibition space where they can zoom in on displays and artifacts. Significantly, all the narratives about enslaved individuals in this exhibition are voiced by staff and community members whose ancestors worked on the same plantations as those whose stories they're sharing. This is typical of an increasingly popular approach in museums, in which objects and stories are interpreted through the first-person voices of Black curators, artists, or communities, rather than the third person, often objectively and authoritatively framed white curatorial voice. Although there is no dedicated slavery museum in Australia, some major museums are acknowledging slavery pasts, and online platforms are offering particularly open spaces and diverse opportunities for these representations. The Australian National Maritime Museum's 2019 blog post by curator Stephen Gapps entitled "Blackbirding, Australia's Slave Trade" examines the forced labour of South Sea Islanders in Queensland. Similarly, the National Museum of Australia has published online content entitled "Island Labourers" on the slide here, about the experiences of these workers and the roles they played in the country's economy and culture. There are also more experimental digital representations of slavery emerging from independent groups and artists. This year, the group Anti-Slavery Australia launched their interactive art installation, Human Mart, an exhibition about modern slavery. One component of the show is a physical space, superficially and ironically presented as a supermarket, which displays 61 products that represent the stories of real people in Australia who have been enslaved. The exhibition also has an accompanying website displaying a selection of these stories. Online visitors can explore products including unsavoury treatment, priced at $3, the story of Solander, which is on the slide here, who married an Australian man that became physically and verbally abusive and trafficked Solander and her son to Thailand, where they became stranded. The Human Mart uses the digital space to play with conventions of online shopping, appealing to audiences with brightly coloured and sleekly designed products that represent deeper questions about the value placed on human lives. Malga Girlbal, or Hard Secret, by contemporary artist Julie Dowling, also tells the personal stories of the enslaved, while using a more conventional digital exhibition approach. Dowling is a Badimaya First Nation woman. She descends from the First Peoples of Australia, but she does not refer to herself as an Aboriginal Australian, as she rejects this as a colonial term. Malga Girlbal was first exhibited in 2017 as a physical show in Germany, but it's now displayed as a digital exhibition on Dowling's website. The main method of storytelling in this exhibition is through vividly coloured portraits of historical figures who were enslaved. Paintings depict a range of women, men and children, including pearl divers, domestic servants, pastoral workers and trackers. These are accompanied by short text detailing individual experiences, as well as greater themes of stolen wages, cultural dispossession, violence and racism in past and contemporary Australia. Dowling's work demonstrates the power of art and personal stories in communicating the lived realities of slavery, and also the potential for this even in the digital space. Some slavery exhibitions are using digital technologies on site at their physical locations. At Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's 5,000-acre plantation in Charlottesville, Virginia, one of the main forms of interpretation is an app entitled Slavery at Monticello, Life and Work on Mulberry Row. The app tells the stories of the free and enslaved people who lived and worked on the plantation, allowing users to explore historical documents and photographs and watch interviews with descendants of enslaved people. Using geolocation technology, the app activates this information as visitors move around the site, creating multi-sensory experiences that help visitors visualize and imagine the lives of those from the past. And I'm going to hand back over to Paul now. Thank you.
Digital heritage projects about the histories of slavery are also going beyond traditional exhibition formats and conventions. In 2019, not-for-profit organisation Historic Hudson Valley released their interactive documentary, People Not Property, Stories of Slavery in the Colonial North. In response to the dominance of narratives set in southern plantations, this online documentary explores the overlooked experiences of enslaved people in the North. Users can navigate their way back and forth across four chapters that interweave historical documents, illustrations and photographs, and with contemporary artworks and poetry, as well as high-quality short films with actors depicting first-hand experiences of enslaved people. These digital interpretations offer new ways of imagining lived experience of slavery through intimate first-person narratives and multi-layered storytelling. Like Julie Dowling's paintings, they also offer examples of the unique potential for art to enter into the gaps in histories where the archives cannot. Digital technologies not only offer new forms of storytelling, but can open up new ways of analysing historical materials about slavery. The Jamaican slave revolt map, created by Vincent Brown and his team at Harvard University, re-examines colonial records to trace and better understand the actions of enslaved people who fought against slave owners in Jamaica. This animated and interactive digital map details the spatial history of the 1760 to 1761 slave revolt in Jamaica, plotting out the combatants' movements to outline three major uprisings and explore their strategic aims. The map is filled out with personal excerpts from colonists' letters and diaries, as well as archival material from military and administrative records and periodicals. The map offers a clever and innovative use of seemingly one-sided colonial records to develop more intimate knowledge of the actions and experiences of enslaved people. There are also rich online archives such as the Slavery, Memory and Orality in Northern Ghana archive. This digital repository was created by Dr. Emmanuel Saboro from the Centre for African and International Studies at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, in collaboration with Brown University in the United States. It brings together a range of digital materials, including contemporary photographs of slave forts and significant sites, such as burial grounds of enslaved people, as well as oral history interviews and recordings of songs and performances with present-day Balsa and Kassina men and women of Ghana. Saboro explains that these contemporary materials help in understanding the history of enslavement and the traumas of capture and captivity. The archive also features documentary films produced by Saboro, which are publicly available to download. As we plan to develop our own online exhibition, which is part of an Australian Research Council grant we have that has been funded to explore the histories and the legacies of slavery in Australia, we're exploring these various methods of digital storytelling and considering the opportunities and challenges that each brings. In one sense, the purely digital space can feel limiting for museum curators, artists, and audiences, in that the physicality of the real, the tactile artifacts and artworks is lost. However, exhibitions such as Julie Dowling's demonstrate the power of artworks even when displayed in digital formats. The Rijksmuseum Slavery exhibition shows the potential to use high-quality images and video of artifacts, which online visitors can explore in greater levels of detail. The Rijksmuseum, as well as the interactive documentary People Not Property rather, and the Slavery, Memory and Orality in Northern Ghana archive, these examples that we've discussed in this talk, also underscore the value in audio stories, images and video in bringing the past to life. Vincent Brown's Slave Revolt map reveals the capacity of digital technologies in re-examining and analysing historical materials and visualising new findings in accessible and engaging formats. All of these examples offer rich ways forward in representing the lived experiences, histories, and memories of slavery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, Isabel, for this very interesting talk. There are several questions so far. But first of all, I would like to encourage our audience to ask the questions. I can suggest you to type them on the chat or ask them orally. So the first question is about ethics and secondary and tertiary trauma. Do you think it's a great issue for the virtual exhibition design to recall the traumatic associated feelings for people who will see this, who will observe this virtual exhibition?
I can think of at least a couple of ways of responding to that really helpful question. And one is that there are actually people who are descendants of slave owners who came to the colonies, including Australia, for whom this kind of research could possibly expose their connections with a history of slavery that might not be otherwise recognised. And for those people, it could be quite difficult. So we have to be very sensitive to the fact that these are stories that could, and histories that could elicit all kinds of different responses from people who might have been directly involved, as well as you say, in the public. I might ask Isabel whether you could comment about public responses to these sorts of exhibitions and what sort of ethical issues or other considerations there might be.
Yeah, we have been speaking, sorry, my face is coming in and out of focus. We have been speaking about this issue, especially because digital formats and online exhibitions in particular, that quite a common approach now is to encourage audiences to actually contribute their own kind of feelings or experiences in response to the stories they are looking at. And so there are some pretty serious ethical questions around how we actually are going to, like firstly, how we regulate that sort of thing, and then who is responsible for moderating that. And I think that sort of then ties into questions around ownership of the stories and the content. And so we've just been looking a lot recently into community engagement, and best practice in community engagement, because that's, I guess it's a term that gets thrown around a little bit in museums. There's a way that sort of like it makes people feel good, the idea of it, but to actually do it properly is very complicated. So there's a really great book that I was reading recently by Bryony Onkiel. I'm probably mispronouncing her surname. And she speaks about community engagement, and that if it's done poorly, it can actually be quite disempowering. So I think but yeah, we're basically looking at speaking to a lot of people to see who's best placed to actually be kind of moderating these stories.
Thank you very much. The next question is about the sources for the virtual exhibition. What about the public domain policy in Australia, and what sorts of data you would like to use for the exhibition?
Well, we've got quite a lot. We've got a bit of a range of data. Sorry, maybe I need to. We're still sifting through data at the moment. Predominantly the data that we have is biographical data about individual slavers and colonists, so slave owners and colonists who came to Australia. But we are now looking at expanding the scope to enslaved people, not just slavers. And I think one of the main ways we've been talking about doing that is potentially oral history recordings, so that they would sort of complement the more, maybe more traditional archival kind of research and material. Like we've got things like land grants, which outline land purchased by colonists and slavers, and photographs and colonial like administrative documents. But I think oral histories may end up being another potentially quite a significant way of getting those more personal stories and hearing the other side as well.
I think part of the question was also about sort of restrictions maybe on sharing of that sort of information, and we're very conscious of this, but we're working closely with our national collecting institutions to identify documents that could be digitized and could be made available within the legal and policy frameworks that are, so as to not impede privacy and all of those sorts of things. But it's quite it's quite a difficult task to identify those sources. But at the same time, a lot of the records that we're looking at are historical records, and documents are quite old now, so they're beyond many of the copyright laws and other sorts of intellectual property agreements that might otherwise govern, more recent material.
I think also that the question was about how much of the resources already are in the public domain.
Well, quite a lot of the biographical information on slavers and colonists is already in the public domain. It's just not very easy to find, but it's held with our state archives, which are like, that's a government department, as well as our state library. So yeah, they're mostly government agencies, which any member of the public can access. And I would say a fair amount, I don't know percentage, but quite a lot has been digitized as well. And the remainder we are in the process of digitizing. But I would say most of it is already technically publicly available.
Okay, thank you. And the final question is about it's a bit echoed with the first presentation. I'm not sure if you attended the first one, but you'll have a chance to have a look at this recording afterwards. So the first presentation was about virtual museum of Antikythera mechanism and serious gaming and full immersive technologies. So the question is, do you think to use some kind of immersive technologies to move from storytelling to story living and using VR, this sort of immersive technologies?
There are a couple of comments that I have in mind around this, and one is the importance in a research project like this that we're involved with, of creating long-lasting resources that can be archived and preserved. And that may be in the National Archives, or it could be in the National Film and Sound Archive, or if there are oral histories, but these are all parts of the research that we're doing. Then the question that you're asking is much more to do with how do you present this in a way that really engages the public and helps to interpret it and create a kind of new narrative, a new way of navigating through that material, which may be quite difficult, as in the case of games and other multimedia sort of material, quite difficult to preserve in the long term. So we're trying to separate the idea of creating long-lasting resources that we can preserve, that will contribute to a historical record, and then what we can draw out of that to create an exhibition that is dynamic and living and could be possibly immersive, could have community engagement. So all of those are options. And given that actually the time frame for our exhibition is 2 or 3 years, so this is the sort of time frame that we're looking at the moment. The research is going on, and it's an interesting question to ask: how will this be finally realized as an exhibition? At that time, in a couple of years, when different options may be available, when different technologies may present themselves, and especially in terms of immersive material, there could be all kinds of different options at that point. That's a very good point and question. Thank you.
And also, I see that sometimes it's uneasy to understand where hype is and where the long-term goals are. So thank you very much for the presentation. I think we have enough time for the other questions. And thank you so much again for being with us at this plenary session, at this start of the conference in general. Thanks a lot.
I'm very, very grateful to be able to contribute to this important event. Thank you.
Okay, this is just great that we are sticking to the timing, to the schedule, and this was the final talk for the first session of the day, and now we have an hour break. So So we will see you in an hour, and there will be 2 sections in a parallel. First one, section 1 will be devoted to cultural heritage in digital dimension. It will be in English, and the other section will be in Russian, devoted to cultural heritage. So right now we have an hour break, and then please have a look at the program you have and choose the correct link, which is just below the title of each section. And thank you so much for joining us at this plenary section and at the conference in general. I hope you enjoyed this section, and see you soon. Я понимаю, сейчас мы видим это, демонстрацию экрана, которая будет обрезана потом, да? Нет, это что такое? Это чей экран? Paul, it's your screen. Okay, thanks. Ну что, друзья, увидимся через час.